Welcome back to the Delaware Way. I'm Larry Menti. AstraZeneca, an important employer in Delaware, has announced it's going to make $1 billion in cuts in payroll. To find out how that's going to affect Delaware, we talked to John Boyd, who is principal at the Boyd Company, and you deal with relocation and these type of cuts. How is it going to affect Delaware?
We think this will actually be a net positive for Delaware. Again, AstraZeneca, like other major players in the pharmaceutical industry, are under enormous pressure to cut costs. There's enormous regulatory costs, advertising costs, R&D costs are soaring for companies like AstraZeneca. And of course, drugs are coming off patents, okay? So in AstraZeneca's case, Crestor, one of their leading cholesterol drugs, is coming off of patent. That's going to severely affect global profits. In response to that, the company is making a lot of cuts, closing production facilities around the world. And Delaware is uniquely positioned to attract some of these migrating workforce.
I don't understand, though. Explain this to me. If it's $1 billion in cuts in payroll, how could that possibly be a benefit to anybody?
Well, look, the company has reduced its brick and mortar and labor force presence in Delaware. Now it's about 2,000 workers. 10 years ago, the company had 5,000 workers in Delaware. But the reality is there's a Fort Washington, Pennsylvania office in Montgomery County that unit is in jeopardy. And we think that's the type of facility these jobs could come back here closer to the headquarters in Delaware. It's only 40 minutes away, and so many of those workers already go back and forth. So that's an opportunity for the company to close down that unit and avoid paying severance pay to the key workers that aren't going to move with the company back to Delaware.
This show also airs in Pennsylvania and the Philadelphia market, so it's bad news for Fort Washington.
It is. It's bad news in one sense, but then again, keeping a presence, keeping AstraZeneca here in the region is actually a positive for the overall labor market. You know, labor markets don't begin and end at municipal lines.
So how do you see this happening? I know this is your expertise. How do you see this happening, if indeed you're correct, and if indeed they cut the Fort Washington facility, and you see that moving to Delaware? You'd think it would make sense for them to move that to Delaware? How many jobs were we talking about? Where would they locate? What would happen? Would there be a new facility?
These will be 700 jobs, and these jobs would go to the Fairfax facility. The company,
they already had cuts there. They had
right.
like 500 cuts.
Right.
So this would bring them back?
Yeah, this will enhance the workforce at that current facility. Now, the company has said they're committed to keeping their headquarters in Delaware. What we project to happen is them leaving Fairfax for another suburban site and doing a lease agreement, maybe a 5 or 10 year lease agreement. And that'll give the company the flexibility to not only go into a newer facility, but also maybe 5 or 10 years from now, move to a South Florida or a Northern Virginia or a Bethesda kind of, and give them some flexibility to get a large incentive package.
Here we go. You said you weren't going to talk about it this time, but the reason they would go to those states would be because they're right to work?
Well, Virginia and Florida are right-to-work states. That plays into production, but those are also markets with a high concentration of skill sets in the pharmaceutical industry.
When would this happen, if it does happen?
Right. Over the next 18 months or so. The company has been very public that these cuts are going to take effect by the end of 2017. They've just announced that they're eliminating their Bristol manufacturing facility in the UK. That's a very significant realignment of their manufacturing. So we project this to play out over the next 18 months or so. Is
it common when a company the size of AstraZeneca has this big of a cutback that they move things closer to headquarters, that they move things closer to home?
Right. In AstraZeneca's case, we see that happening because so much of the workforce now is commuting the 40 miles back and forth. So in that sense, and they want to do a new headquarters. The reality is the Fairfax facility is 35% less than it was 10 years ago. They've demolished 500,000 square feet of office buildings there. They sold 400,000 square feet to JP Morgan Chase. That's an indicator of how they feel about that older property.
But they are committed to Delaware?
They are, yes.
In the short term, or do you see a time when they might be moving?
Well, even keeping them for another 7 years or so would be a major win for Delaware. Typically, I think the company wants to do a lease, which will give them the flexibility in 5 or 10 years to react to new market pressures and revisit this issue 5 or 10 years from now. So all Delaware can do in the meantime is keep taxes low. And of course, the other subject that I promised I wouldn't
The right
mention.
to work. We'll talk about that next time. John, thank you so much. John Boyd is the principal at the Boyd Company. When we come back, an important event is coming up next week to help raise money for men and women in uniform when the Delaware Way continues.